Our story begins in a rush, a figure sprinting as if pursued by shadows, each hurried footstep a drumbeat against the rising anxiety in his chest. It was Shinjonio, our protagonist, bursting into the scene, the words tumbling out of him in a breathless rush. "I'm late! Terribly late!" Two figures, Kim Duan and Kim Jim, turned as one at his frantic arrival. Kim Duan's face was an immediate thundercloud, a complaint about the delay already brewing on his lips. Shinjonio, still catching his breath, offered a sincere apology. "I'm really sorry. I got held up." He trailed off, a blush creeping up his neck. This was not the first impression Kim Duan, however, wasn't quite ready to let it go. "Just joking, newbie!" he boomed, clapping Shinjonio on the shoulder with a force that almost sent him stumbling. "Relax, we haven't been waiting that long," Kim Jim elaborated, gesturing towards the looming dungeon portal. "Chanu and Dun are already inside, getting a head start." Despite the light-hearted tone, a knot of unease tightened in Shinjonio's stomach. "Still," he mumbled, "it's not a good start, is it?" 3 months he'd been with this guild, and on his very first dungeon raid, he was already late. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was starting on the wrong foot. As they approached the swirling vortex of the portal, a wave of self-doubt washed over Shinjonio. "Pull it together," he told himself sternly. "This is your first real dungeon raid as a support. You need to prove you're not just dead weight. Prove you're useful." Just then, another figure approached, his stride confident and easy. Mun Doyen, the leader, his presence radiating an aura of quiet authority. He fixed Shinjonio with a direct gaze. "First dungeon, support, right?" Shinjonio nodded, a nervous tremor in his voice as he confirmed. "Yes, sir. First time as a support, though I have been in dungeons before, as an assistant." Doyen's expression softened slightly. "Supports are different. We don't have the combat skills of hunters. You need to be careful." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "Get too close to the fight, you'll be dragged in. Stay too far, and we can't protect you. Distance is key." He paused, then added, "As a creator, your job is simpler. Stay safe, and when I signal, craft a dagger for me." Doyen's gaze sharpened. "Understood? A dagger?" Shinjonio asked, a slight frown creasing his brow. "That's all?" Mun Doyen nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "For me, yes. Just one dagger. It's an easy dungeon, no need to overburden yourself." Just then, Lehen, the guild censor, spoke, his voice low and serious. "Mana. I sense it. Monster nearby." The casual atmosphere evaporated instantly. A collective shift in stance, a silent preparation for battle rippled through the group. Mun Doyen's voice became crisp and commanding. "Formation. Lehen, observations?" Lehen closed his eyes for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. 3 small mana sources, and 1 large one. Big enough to be a boss. A flicker of surprise crossed Mun Doyen's face. "A boss? Out here? They usually don't leave their designated areas." He shook his head, his gaze hardening with resolve. "I'll take the boss. You 3 handle the rest." Turning to Shinjonio, Mun Doyen asked, "Dagger? How long?" Shinjonio's mind raced, calculating. 20 seconds, but it will only last for less than a minute." "Perfect." Doyen's tone was decisive. "Start now. I'll finish this in 40 seconds." As if on cue, the ground shimmered, and crystal lizards materialized, their ranks classified as Rank D. "Showtime!" Kim Duan yelled, his energy exploding outwards as he activated his ability. With a powerful surge of force, he sent several lizards flying. Kim Jim, never one to be outdone in flair, rushed forward, her fist glowing with power. She landed a solid punch on a lizard, sending it skidding back, then spun away, striking a flamboyant pose, a triumphant grin on her face. But her grin faltered as the other crystal lizards advanced with surprising speed. "They regenerate fast," she warned, her voice sharp. "Careful, 2 are heading my way." Kim Duan, always thinking tactically amidst the chaos, called out, "Spell Li? Ready yet?" A moment later, Li Hen's deep voice confirmed, Almost, now. With a flick of his staff, multiple fireballs erupted, streaking towards the lizards and detonating in a fiery explosion. Clear! Li Hen announced, the heat still radiating from his position. Duan, Jim, assist. Shinjonio, observing from the relative safety of the back, couldn't help but be impressed. Excellent teamwork, he thought. Flawless sequence. Mun Doyen's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and focused. Weapon? Almost ready. Shinjonio replied, his own voice betraying a slight tremor. Focus. Don't get distracted, he reminded himself. Moments later, channeling his nascent creator ability, a basic F-rank skill utilizing the ambient mana, Shinjonio forged a simple sword. He tossed it towards Mun Doyen, who caught it effortlessly in midair. Doyen's A-rank shadow weapon ability flared, enveloping the crude creation, enhancing it, infusing it with power. A crystal lizard lunged at Doyen, jaws snapping. But with a swift, almost casual movement, Doyen decapitated the monster in a single strike. The enhanced sword shimmered, then dissolved into motes of light, its brief purpose fulfilled. Anyone hurt? Kim Duan called out, surveying the fallen lizards. Fine. Kim Jim replied, brushing dust from her clothes with a flourish. Watching them, Shinjonio felt a surge of conflicting emotions. They were impressive. Much better than he'd expected. Each of them remarkable in their own right. Their teamwork was seamless, efficient, leaving no room for error. If they keep this up, he thought, they could become a top-tier guild. And then there was him. He'd done, what? Created a dagger. A single, fleeting dagger. Is that all I am? Useful? Doubt gnawed at him. Do I even deserve to be here? As if sensing his internal turmoil, Mun Doyen approached him, his expression surprisingly gentle. You alright? Hurt? No, I'm fine. Shinjonio stammered. It's just... I didn't really do anything. Useful, I mean. Mun Doyen chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Useful? You just saved me a fortune, kid. He gestured towards the dissipating remnants of the shadow-enhanced weapon. Did you see that? My ability consumes weapons. And I can't keep using expensive, high-quality ones for every fight. That's why I need a creator like you. Your ability works on anything with mana. He clapped Shinjonio on the shoulder again, this time with more reassurance than force. You did great. For your first dungeon, you did well. Keep going like this, and don't you run off on us now. Shinjonio, a small spark of hope igniting within him, managed a shaky, I will. I'll do my best. Alright, loot and scoot, Kim Duan declared, already moving to gather the crystal fragments and scales dropped by the defeated lizards. Just as they began collecting their spoils, the ground beneath them trembled. Earthquake? Kim Jim exclaimed, stumbling slightly. Li Hen, ever the pragmatist, frowned. Cave collapsing? Did we anger it by killing the boss? But Shinjonio, his eyes fixed on a point in the cave wall, pointed a trembling finger. Look, over there. The wall was crumbling, dust and pebbles cascading down. Li Hen, reacting instantly, channeled mana into his staff, illuminating the newly exposed section of wall. It's a passage, he murmured, his voice tinged with curiosity. Looks like it leads somewhere. Mun Doyen was thoughtful, his gaze narrowed as he considered the implications. Kim Duan, however, was already bursting with enthusiasm. Secret passage! Hidden treasure, definitely! He was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet, eager to explore. Kim Jim echoed his excitement, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Li Hen, ever cautious, cautioned. Hold on, we don't know what's in there. But Mun Doyen, seemingly swayed by the allure of the unknown and Kim Duan's eagerness, asked Li Hen. Can you sense anything? Li Hen shook his head. Nothing. It's blank. Then what are we waiting for? Mun Doyen's decision was made. Let's be quick. Seeing the others were already moving, even Li Hen, with a sigh of resignation, followed. Junio coming? Mun Doyen called over his shoulder. Shinjonio hesitated for a moment, a prickle of unease running down his spine. But the allure of the unknown, the thrill of the potential discovery, tugged at him. He followed them into the newly revealed passage. And then darkness. Except, not the darkness of a cave, but the darkness of absolute despair. Later, much later, Shinjonio was running again. But this time, it wasn't just to be on time. He was running for his life. He was running from something that should not exist in a ranked dungeon, from something that defied all logic, all understanding. "Everyone dead?" he gasped, the words ragged and choked with disbelief. "All of them, except me." A monster, a creature beyond comprehension, had decimated his guild in an instant. A monster that magic couldn't detect. Unthinkable. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Too late. The monster, a hulking shadow of nightmare, was gaining on him. A colossal fist slammed into his back, sending him flying through the air like a rag doll. He slammed into the cavern floor, the impact driving the air from his lungs, and a hot, metallic taste filling his mouth. Blood. "Get up," a voice screamed in his head. "You can't die like this. Not like this." Desperation fueled him. With trembling hands, he conjured mana, shaping it, willing it into existence. A dagger. He hurled it at the monstrous form pursuing him. Useless. It bounced harmlessly off the creature's hide. The monster roared, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality, and lunged again. Its massive claws ripped through the ground, shattering the stone beneath him, and Shinjonio felt himself falling, plummeting into the abyss. As he fell, fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped him. Useless, he thought, the word echoing in his mind. A useless rank D support. Not even healing or buffs. Just creation. And I couldn't even protect them. I found a guild, a place where they actually needed me, and I failed them. Abandoned them. Just to die like this. Anyone else, anyone in my place, would have done better. I should have never awakened. The thought was a bitter, self-condemning whisper in the darkness. And then a chime. Faint at first, then growing stronger, insistent. System notification. You have found something. But the rest of the message was censored? Blanked out? You have met the requirements to become a player. Light. Blinding, overwhelming light, erupted around him, swallowing the darkness, pushing back the fear. A voice, resonating with an almost artificial warmth, echoed in his mind. Welcome, player. Time seemed to dissolve. When Shinjonio finally opened his eyes again, the cavern floor was solid beneath him. The system's voice, now clear and distinct, announced, new reward available. Reward? What reward? He understood nothing. But a strange compulsion, a feeling of inevitability, guided his hand. He opened his palm, and a blue, shimmering button materialized above it. He clicked it. Just clicked. Some time later, Shinjonio found himself back at the place where he had fallen. The system's voice, calm and matter-of-fact, announced, experience from previous save inherited. A guttural roar ripped through the cavern. The crystal golem, impossibly, still stood. But this time, something was different. Reward distribution complete, the system declared. Without conscious thought, Shinjonio's hand moved. From his fingertips, a volley of ethereal swords materialized, streaking towards the monstrous golem. They struck true, and with a thunderous crash, the golem collapsed, its stone form shattering into dust. A wave of fragmented memories, alien and yet strangely familiar, washed over Shinjonio. Memories of a future, a ravaged world, a life not quite his own, and yet, undeniably his. There was no time to unravel the tangled threads. The golem, or rather, what he thought was the golem, was rising again. At the last second, instinct took over. A shimmering barrier of energy sprang into existence around him, just as the golem's fist slammed into it. The barrier held. It took no damage? Shinjonio stared in disbelief. G-type monster or not, its durability was monstrous. The barrier shattered, dissipating into sparks of light. But the memories, they whispered tactics, weaknesses. Golem type, but it's not a true golem, the future memories insisted. No inherent weak points. Regeneration. Damage from multiple angles, simultaneous impact, skill-based user, grid, beam, equal distance. Suddenly, clarity pierced through the fog of confusion. He was a creator. A skill-based user. The memories, however fragmented, offered a path. Channeling his newfound understanding, Shinjonio conjured not just a sword, or a barrier, but a grid of shimmering energy, within which beams of light coalesced, radiating outward in perfect synchronicity. He unleashed the abilities, a coordinated assault of light and energy, impacting the golem from every direction at once. The golem roared, a sound of pain and shattering stone. As the smoke cleared, it was gone. Completely destroyed. Special grid, just a support ability, I thought, Shinjonio mused, observing the lingering traces of his creation. Something was forming in front of him, coalescing out of the dissipating mana. Passive skill, magic absorption activated. The system announced. Magic absorption? He stared at the floating text, utterly bewildered. What was all this? He began to piece it together, fragments of memories, flashes of a future. A future that was his, and yet wasn't. A world that had collapsed, horrors beyond imagining. He had absorbed experiences, knowledge, from that future. But was it even his future? Too much was wrong. Like the status window, flickering at the edge of his vision. Something he never understood, even in his past life? Am I a player now? The thought was a hesitant whisper. Players. Chosen ones? Awakened. They weren't supposed to exist yet, not in this world. Not for another 2 years. Magic absorption, contaminated mana. I understand now, he thought, a dawning realization in his voice. How to obtain that magic. But that could wait. First, his body needed tending. The scene shifted abruptly. Hunter Association headquarters. A woman's voice, sharp and questioning. You're sure? You just let him go. Doubt laced her tone. Small guild destroyed, unconfirmed dungeon, and he's the only survivor. Out of 4. A man's voice, weary but firm, replied. He could have escaped. He took care of the bodies. Reported everything to the association. Portal's gone. No further investigation possible. The woman pressed. But what do you think? Her suspicion hung in the air. The man sighed, a sound of professional resignation. Do you really think a rank D killed 4 hunters? Wake up, Lee. This isn't a police case. Dungeon incidents, unverified. Evidence gathering is all we can do. I know, she conceded, her voice softening slightly. Maybe, the man continued, his tone speculative. They were those people. Hunters disappearing into unreported portals, chasing quick cash, living in the shadows. Small guilds can't win portal bids legitimately. He paused then, with a note of finality. Call if there's anything else. I'm leaving. As he walked away, he glanced down at the file in his hand. Shinjonio, the name read. He admitted to himself, under his breath. I didn't tell her everything. This case, it felt different. The calmness of the survivor. 0 dungeon experience, a tragedy witnessed firsthand, yet, no panic. Something missing. Personality? Maybe. But he'd seen this kind of detachment before. Something was off. But he couldn't put his finger on it. Not yet. I'll take a closer look later. Elsewhere, Shinjonio walked through the bustling city streets, the recent events replaying in his mind, a dissonant chord in his thoughts. Something's wrong. The dungeon, it wasn't in the memories of his past life? And that purchase license for the portal, stamped with the association seal, registered as unconfirmed. Impossible. Impersonation? Association corruption? But that wasn't the real worry. Missing people. Guilds vanishing. It wasn't just Dawn Guild. He remembered news reports, whispers, names. Moon Duan, other promising hunters, prodigies, heroes in the making. Someone is trying to erase them, he realized with chilling clarity. His own survival now felt less like a miracle, more like a dangerous anomaly. He was the sole survivor of a missing persons case. Suspicion would fall on him. He had 2 years until the player selection. 2 years to prepare. Mobilize his abilities. Develop them. But how? How to grow strong without drawing attention? He glanced at the system window, a usable ability blinking enticingly. That one, he thought, pointing an invisible finger at the option. That one. A year later, deep within a secluded forest, high in the mountains, the sharp crack of steel on steel echoed through the trees. Sparks flew as a hunter, blade flashing, struck at a hulking monster. But the monster, with surprising agility for its size, raised a shield, blocking the attack. The impact was jarring. The hunter's blade shuddered, cracked spiderwebbing across the metal before it shattered completely, the broken pieces scattering to the forest floor. Fear flickered in the hunter's eyes. Before he could react, the monster retaliated, a heavy blow sending him flying backwards. He managed to land on his feet, jamming the broken sword hilt into the ground to brace himself. He looked up at the creature, a Null Lord Danger Level D, a high-ranking Null, physically superior to any ordinary Gull. What is that doing in an E-rank dungeon? He gasped, his voice trembling. Even rank D hunters struggled with these monsters. The Null Lord lunged again. The hunter with the shield reacted instantly, stepping forward to intercept the attack. But the impact was brutal. His hands trembled violently as he braced against the creature's weight. We can't hold out for long, he yelled over the monster's snarl. But we have to at least do some damage. Nearby, the swordsman stared, horrified. Grim Reaper of low-rank hunters, he muttered, his voice barely audible. The Null, they call it that. It wasn't just physical strength. Monsters of this level were vulnerable to magic. Hunting teams relied on it. But this Null defied logic. Fear, raw and primal, washed over the hunters. The price of their foolish pride, of underestimating the dungeon, annihilation. They had one physical damage dealer. His weapon shattered. No spares. Attack! The tank yelled, desperation in his voice. The swordsman, paralyzed by fear, could only stammer. But my sword! He'd gathered the maximum number of people, pride blinding him to reason. Hiring a mage who was useless, ending up like this. Then, something caught his eye. A young man, calmly chipping away at magic crystals with a pickaxe. An assistant. Assistants didn't fight. They were just handymen. Unrecognized, disrespected. An assistant, the hunter's mind clicked. We have an assistant. They were about to die, and he was just mining crystals. Suddenly, something impossible happened. The pickaxe in the assistant's hand, and the assistant's hands themselves seemed to vanish into thin air. Creation ability? A flicker of hope ignited within him. Useful, even a low-quality creation was better than nothing. Hey! He yelled, his voice cracking. Assistant! Hey you! The assistant turned. It was Junio. The man rushed over, his voice frantic. You're a creator, right? Can you make swords? Strong ones? Shinjonio nodded, a hesitant flicker in his eyes. The man shoved the broken blade towards him. Make me a sword! Please! A strong one! Shinjonio sighed, a deep, weary sound. I'm an assistant, not a support. Remember? The swordsman's voice was trembling, near hysterical. This isn't the time for that. Don't you realize we're going to die? If we can't handle this, boss. Shinjonio let out another sigh, a mix of resignation and something else, something akin to resolve. Fine, he conceded reluctantly. He began to channel mana, crafting, shaping as he spoke. But I have conditions. Clear the dungeon, and you forget about my ability. And when we divide the loot, I get the same share as a support. The man, clutching the newly formed sword, barely glanced at it. He despised the mediocre quality, the work of a failed creator, an assistant. Ridiculous. Clear a dungeon with this? But then, Shinjonio smiled, a small, almost mischievous smile playing at the corners of his lips. Funny, isn't it? He murmured. And as he spoke, the weapons in the hands of the other hunters began to shimmer, to change, subtly at first, then more dramatically. A good weapon, Shinjonio stated, his voice now firm, confident, is essential for clearing a dungeon. He looked at the hunters, his gaze unwavering. As long as you have that element, I guarantee you, we will clear this dungeon. Sometime later, within the imposing walls of the Overkill Guild, one of Korea's 3 largest, a young woman named Manhwa walked purposefully down a long corridor. She stopped before massive, ornate doors, and with a polite knock awaited admittance. A voice from within, deep and resonant, granted entry. Yunan, the guild master, sat behind a large desk, his presence commanding even seated. Manhwa bowed slightly. Guild master, she addressed him respectfully. The association sent a cooperation request. Yunan raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp and intelligent. Dungeon level errors? He asked, his voice even. Manhwa confirmed. Standard cooperation request, but with payment as stated. Yunan's expression remained unreadable. Do we have a choice? Hard to find awakened capable of handling forcibly closed gates. His gaze drifted to a screen on his desk, displaying a news article. He noticed a familiar face in the team photo accompanying the story. A rank bug dungeon cleared, in Seoridon. He pointed to the face in the photo. I was sent there, to Seoridon, a few weeks ago. Bug dungeon incident. I saw him there. That man, assistant. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, a new train of thought taking hold. Assistants. New dungeons appear all the time, but bug dungeons, rare. Survivors even rarer. And this assistant, 2 bug dungeon survivor teams. He shook his head, a slow dawning of suspicion creeping into his voice. Coincidence? Manhwa echoed his concern. Bug dungeons, more and more lately. D-rank dungeon turned B-rank a few days ago. Team wiped out instantly. Yunan sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Hunter Association must be struggling. Public criticism, responsibility to predict and announce dungeon levels. He closed his eyes for a moment, lost in thought. The guy at the association must be having a hard time. He opened his eyes again, a pragmatic glint in them. Increasing awakened. Extra commissions for a while, to monitor. He waved a hand dismissively. Focus on what I asked you to investigate. Smiths. Rank A or higher. Any? Manhwa's response was immediate and definitive. Searched everywhere. No weaponsmith of rank A or higher, but I did find a B-rank weaponsmith. Yunan considered this, his gaze distant, the weight of guild master decisions settling back upon his shoulders. The air in the office hung thick with the metallic tang of steel and the faint scent of quenching oil. Taeyeon, regarding the latest blade presented to him. A young, eager-faced smith stood nervously before him, hands clasped, awaiting judgment. A D-rank weapon, you say? Taeyeon's voice was low, carrying the weight of years spent honing his own skills and leading his guild. Yes, sir. I believe in my craftsmanship. With a sigh that was more weariness than impatience, Taeyeon rose. The transport hummed to a halt near the dungeon gates, the air thick with anticipation and the hushed murmur of a gathered crowd. Journalists, their cameras poised and microphones extended, surged forward as Taeyeon emerged. Guild Master Taeyeon. Comment on the dungeon error. Is it true members of Overkill are part of the trap team? Are you here because of your guild's reputation, Guild Master? The questions bombarded him, sharp and invasive. Taeyeon ignored them, his gaze scanning the chaotic scene. He spotted her then, a young woman, her face etched with worry, standing apart from the frantic press. She stepped forward as he approached, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Guild Master Taeyeon, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming personally. The situation? Taeyeon's voice was clipped direct. An attack team. She explained quickly. 6 hunters, 2 supports, an assistant. They were sent in for a D-rank training exercise. But, she swallowed, her voice catching. The dungeon shifted. It's C-rank now. Taeyeon nodded grimly. Numbers are irrelevant at C-rank. How long have they been inside? Almost 2 hours. She replied, her voice barely a whisper. He approached the shimmering dungeon portal, the air around it crackling with unstable energy. 2 hours. He murmured more to himself than to her. I don't know how many of them are still alive. He turned to the woman, his expression grim but resolute. "But I will do everything in my power." A slight bow, barely perceptible, was her only response. Gratitude, heavy and unspoken, hung in the air. Taein turned his attention to the gate, the swirling energy of vortex of unknown dangers. He dropped his weapon case onto the ground with a dull thud. He extended his hand towards Hizu, who stood beside him, her expression calm and focused amidst the chaos. Without a word, she reached into her satchel. A faint glow emanated from within, growing brighter until a soft, ethereal light spilled out. She withdrew her hand, now holding not documents or tools, but a gleaming, obsidian-hilted sword, radiating a subtle energy. Hizu, a B-rank support, specialized in subspace manipulation, even in enclosed areas like this unstable dungeon gate. She was his key. She presented the sword to him, hilt first. Taein took it, the unfamiliar weight settling in his hand. This wasn't his usual weapon, but it was imbued with her power. He stepped closer to the gate. In that moment, the chaos around him faded. His world narrowed to the swirling portal, the obsidian sword in his grip, and the lives hanging in the balance beyond. He channeled his own invasion ability, focusing his intent, his strength, and with a guttural cry, he delivered a devastating strike against the gate. His invasion ability, honed through years of relentless training, was activated. A low hum resonated from the blade, and then, with a sickening crackle, a hairline fracture spiderwebbed across the shimmering surface of the gate. The crack widened rapidly, growing larger, tearing through the magical barrier within seconds. His ability, forceful path opening, was capable of breaking any barrier, even the dimensional walls between worlds, though the strain on his own being was immense when traversing true dimensional shifts. Here, focused on a dungeon gate, it was merely a powerful, if weapon-destructive, technique. The sword, having served its purpose, shattered in his grip. He returned the broken hilt to Hizu, who accepted it with a silent nod. "Be careful," she murmured, her eyes reflecting concern. "I will," he replied, his voice rough. He stepped through the jagged crack in the gate and into the unknown. The dungeon air hit him like a physical blow, thick, humid, and heavy with a cloying, unpleasant smell. Reptilian. Instantly, Taein recognized the stench of damp scales and something vaguely musky. The floor beneath his boots was surprisingly clean, swept bare of debris. Intelligent monsters, then. And judging by the smell, lizard men. D-rank, humanoid reptilian monsters known for their tribal societies and lifespan directly tied to their intelligence and combat prowess. He moved into the gloom, his senses heightened, his mind racing. He needed to assess the group's size, combat strength, and overall danger level as quickly as possible. But they had been in here for 2 hours. They could already be dead. As he advanced, a faint sound reached his ears, the clash of steel, punctuated by shouts and cries. Battle. Relief flooded him, quickly tempered by apprehension. He pushed forward, his pace quickening. He could only imagine the worst. But what he found was unexpected. The rookies were not being slaughtered. They were fighting. And not just fighting, but holding their own. Lizardmen swarmed them, snapping and slashing, but the hunters met their attacks with surprising coordination, blocking, parrying, counterattacking as a cohesive unit. A young girl, an archer, loosed an arrow that pierced the lizardman's scaled hide, dropping it with a guttural hiss. Taein was genuinely surprised. Were they winning? Their movements, though frantic, were efficient. Yet the lizardmen were visibly stronger, their blows heavier. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted. A lizardman, larger than the others, with brutal strength, knocked a hunter's sword flying from his grasp. The man stumbled back, terror widening his eyes as the lizardman raised its crude blade for a killing blow. Taein moved instantly, adrenaline surging. He surged forward, thinking it wasn't too late. But then, impossibly, something else intervened. The lizardman's blade descended, but not on the defenseless hunter. It was blocked by a sword that appeared as if from nowhere, materializing in midair to intercept the strike. The lizardman recoiled, momentarily stunned. The hunter gasped, his breath ragged with fear and relief. Taein skidded to a halt, astonishment overriding his urgency. Magic? But no. He dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it arose. The weapon, it pulsed with a familiar, almost tangible energy. The dear creation. Impossible. Who could have created such a weapon here, now? He turned, his gaze drawn to the back of the cavern, towards the crystalline formations that pulsed with faint light. There, near the crystals, stood the assistant. The one who had conjured the sword. The weapon still hovered in the air, shimmering with an inner luminescence. Their eyes met. The assistant, a young man with an air of quiet competence, turned his head slightly, acknowledging Taeyeon's gaze. Juno. He scanned the team, his brow furrowed in concentration, and began to count them off on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. He counted 9 people battling the lizardmen. Then, he shifted his gaze back to Taeyeon and pointed a single finger at him. 10. Juno stated, his voice calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of something other. Taeyeon frowned, confusion warring with his growing fascination. 10? That's strange. I was told 9 entered. Yun Taeyeon, guild master of Overkilled, watched with narrowed eyes as one of the team members, a burly warrior, blocked a lizardman's attack but was sent sprawling backward by the sheer force. A mage, nimble despite his robes, rushed to assist him. The lizardman, emboldened, raised its weapon high above its head, preparing to strike. Concern tightened Taeyeon's chest. He moved to attack, drawing his own blade, a familiar weight and comfort in his hand. Meanwhile, Juno glanced towards the open weapon case he'd carried, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected Yun Taeyeon himself to grace this debacle. He noticed Taeyeon drawing a weapon, an extra, not the broken one. The heat of Taeyeon's fiery strike washed over Juno's face, a gust of hot wind carrying the scent of ozone and burned earth. Taeyeon's blade blazed with crimson flames, pressing against the lizardman's crude weapon, shattering its defense with raw power. Retreat! Taeyeon roared to the hunters behind him, his voice cutting through the chaos. The mage helped the downed warrior to his feet, offering a grateful nod to Taeyeon. With swift, brutal efficiency, Taeyeon disarmed his opponent, reignited the flames around his blade, and unleashed a series of devastating strikes. Green blood spurted from the lizardman's scaled body, staining the cavern floor until, with a heavy thud, the monster collapsed. Taeyeon straightened, breathing heavily, but already assessing the situation. Despite being B-rank, he muttered, examining the blade in his hand. It still hasn't reached its full potential. He lifted his gaze, scanning the cavern. Another lizardman, enraged by its comrade's demise, charged. The monster attacked, and Taeyeon parried, leaping back, distancing himself from the frenzied assault. He landed beside Juno, who called his name, a question in his tone. Taeyeon, Juno began, his voice measured. Does this exertion happen every time you use your skill? It seems exhausting. The remaining hunters rushed towards the enraged lizard man, their fear now replaced by a surge of adrenaline and renewed determination. Taeyeon glanced at Juno, a flicker of annoyance at the interruption in the midst of battle. Are you asking for trouble? He growled. Suddenly, a shower of blue sparks erupted between them. From the shimmering energy, a new weapon materialized. Juno extended his hand, offering the newly formed blade. Take it, he said, his voice laced with a hint of weary resignation. And try not to destroy your poor weapon this time. Taeyeon stared at the offered sword in astonishment. Juno had materialized it with a single, effortless gesture. You are an extremely skilled weapon creator, Taeyeon breathed, his gaze shifting to the pickaxe still clutched in Juno's other hand. An assistant? He questioned, his voice laced with disbelief. Low-rank supports sometimes took on such roles in dungeons, but this level of creation skill. Juno interrupted his burgeoning questions. He took the broken hilt from Taeyeon's hand, his expression unreadable. There is a condition, Juno stated, his gaze unwavering. After clearing this dungeon, after we leave, you must forget about me. Forget about my abilities. Taeyeon reached out for the new sword, his brow furrowed. Forget? You truly believe I can simply forget because you asked me to? In response, Juno began to deconstruct the broken sword in his hand, the pieces dissolving back into shimmering energy. If not, Juno said, his voice calm but firm. Then just let me go. Cut them all down with your high-class weapon. Taein sighed, running a hand through his hair again. The weapon in his hand would likely break again the moment he poured his skill into it. Having a few more wouldn't hurt. He took the offered sword, the unfamiliar weight settling comfortably in his hand. Understood, he said, meeting Juno's gaze. I promise to forget. A faint smile touched Juno's lips, barely there and gone in an instant. Good. Go then. With a renewed sense of purpose, Taein turned back to the battle. He charged towards the enraged lizard man, igniting the new sword with a brilliant flame. He struck, causing a massive eruption of fire to engulf the monster. The lizard man roared, straining against the onslaught, but its weapon, a crude, stone-tipped spear, shattered under the force of Taein's attack. Taein blinked, momentarily surprised. He hadn't even intended to break the weapon, merely counter the attack. He glanced down at the blade in his hand. His control, it was visibly better than usual. Was it the weapon itself? Stronger than he anticipated? He glanced back at Juno, who was already collecting the crystalline mana stones, his movements precise and efficient. A weapon above B rank manifested in moments. Incredible. At that moment, the wounded lizard man, wielding its broken spear, lunged again, desperate. Taein prepared himself, a thrill of anticipation coursing through him. Interesting. Let's see what this weapon can truly do. Increase the power, he murmured, focusing his intent. He plunged the tip of the blue sparking sword into the monster's abdomen. Blades of flame, sharper, hotter than before, pierced through the lizardman's body, erupting in a blinding flash on the other side. Without pausing, Taein pushed off the monster's shoulder, leaping behind it. He soared upwards, raising the sword above him, igniting it once more. He drove the blade down, burying it deep into the lizardman's skull. The monster screamed, a sound of agony and defeat, and then collapsed, its body hitting the cavern floor with a heavy thud. Taein straightened, examining the sword in his hand. Not a scratch. At least, he wouldn't need bandages for his hands this time. Guild Master! Taein! He was pulled back from his contemplation by voices calling his name. The rookies. They rushed towards him, their faces alight with relief and gratitude. Guild Master, thank you! We would have been dead without you. He walked towards them, relief washing over him. It seems no one is seriously injured, he observed, a rare smile touching his lips. That is all that matters. One of the men, the warrior who had lost his sword earlier, turned, his gaze fixed on Juno, who was discreetly moving towards the back of the cavern. That weapon, the warrior breathed, awestruck. Without it, we wouldn't have lasted. We endured thanks to him. Taein's gaze followed the warrior's. He turned to Juno, his mind already working, piecing things together. He approached the young man, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a burgeoning curiosity. What is your name? He asked, his voice carrying a newfound warmth. Juno paused, mid-stride, and turned. Reason? He questioned, his expression neutral. We should know each other's names, Taein stated, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. To address each other properly. I am Yun Taein. Juno closed his backpack, his movements economical, and stood up, finally meeting Taein's gaze directly. Juno, he stated simply. Then, glancing towards a hulking figure near the entrance, he added, I'll lead the stone man at the entrance. The warrior, listening in confusion, readily agreed. As Juno turned to leave, Taein stopped him. Wait. I'll go with you. To the boss room. He took the backpack from Juno's hands, handing it to another guild member. A dungeon bug. We can't exit without defeating the boss. I'll handle it. Juno frowned slightly. I'm just an assistant, he said, gesturing to the discarded pickaxe. It needs to be done, Taein stated firmly, his gaze meeting Juno's. No weapon can fully withstand my skill. But, he hesitated, a flicker of concern in his eyes. Breaking the weapons you create for me would be pointless. Juno's brow furrowed. My weapons will not break. A hint of irritation laced his voice. I believe you, Taein conceded quickly, realizing his misstep. But we are in a bug dungeon. The creatures here, they aren't ordinary lizard men. If the boss is the same, extra caution wouldn't hurt. Juno sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping slightly in resignation. He nodded a reluctant agreement. Fine. Just follow along. They soon found themselves in a vast hall, lit by flickering torches casting long, dancing shadows. Frozen at the entrance, they saw it, a throne at the far end, upon which sat the Lizard Lord, radiating an aura of C+ rank danger. Ignore the danger level, Taein said, his voice low and confident. Ignore everything you think you know about this place. We finish this quickly. A predatory smile touched his lips. Activate your ability. Taein mourned internally that this new weapon, too, would likely shatter. I already ensured that won't happen, Juno stated, his voice quiet but firm, as if reading Taein's thoughts. The Lizard Lord, disturbed by their intrusion, extended a clawed hand, pointing a spear at them. He roared, a guttural command, and the remaining lizard men charged. Both Taein and Juno leaped back as the horde surged forward. Taein propelled himself off the wall, surging towards the Lizard Lord with blinding speed. The Lizard Lord, surprisingly agile for its size, noticed his approach and swung a massive claw. Taein held the blue sparking sword before him just as the monster whipped its powerful tail forward, unleashing a gust of wind that forced Taein to increase the distance. He pushed off again, running, but this time, the Lizard Lord charged straight at him. Their blades collided with a deafening crash, sparks flying. Both fighters were forced back by the impact. The Lizard Lord mounted its monstrous lizard, which immediately began to spew tongues of fire from its maw. A searing jet of flame shot towards Taein. He raised his sword to block, but before he could, a shimmering blue shield materialized in front of him, conjured by Juno just in time, deflecting the intense blast. Juno himself stood off to the side, observing, his posture relaxed yet alert. The lizard man charged again, throwing Taein backwards, sending him sprawling near Juno. Are you not just a weapon creator? Taein gasped, catching his breath. Juno glanced at him, a hint of amusement in his eyes. A shield, he replied calmly, can also become a weapon. He ignited his own manifested sword with blue flames, a faint smile playing on his lips. Once we are out of here, Juno said, his voice carrying a promise of future answers, I will have many questions for you. With that, Juno ran towards the Lizard Lord, joining the fray. The Lizard Lord swung its hand, launching a chain from its spear. The chain, tipped with a wickedly sharp point, struck Taein's sword, coiling around the blade. With a powerful tug, the Lizard Lord pulled its hand back, dragging Taein towards it, directly towards the snapping jaws of its monstrous lizard mount. Seeing this, Juno extended his hand forward, his voice sharp with command. Stop messing around, Taein! Focus! In that instant, Juno deconstructed the shield, and Taein, momentarily surprised, released his grip on the chain-entangled sword. Had to test it, didn't I? Taein said with a grin. A new weapon, shimmering with blue energy, materialized in Juno's hand. The exhausted protagonist tossed the new sword to him. Take care of your pet, Juno instructed, his voice weary. The chain weapon, still energized, flew harmlessly over the Lizard Lord's head. Taein, wielding the new sword, unleashed a flurry of slashes at the monster's exposed mouth. Blood splattered, startling the beast. He threw the new sword, just in time, the monster dodging at the last possible moment. In the blink of an eye, Taein closed the distance, and with a powerful kick, sent the Lizard Lord flying from its mount. The Lizard Lord crashed to the ground, stunned. Taein soared into the air, swinging the newly manifested sword, igniting it with a blinding flame once more. What the monster saw in that moment made it frantic with fear. It had no time to react before Taein's blade descended, severing its arm in a shower of sparks and green blood. Realizing it was outmatched, the Lizard Lord, in a last desperate act, turned its gaze towards Juno, who had remained on the periphery of the battle. Grabbing its broken spear, it charged. But Juno was prepared. Just before the attack landed, he raised a shimmering blue shield, intercepting the charge. The monster recoiled, momentarily thrown off balance. Who? Juno said, his voice laced with displeasure. Thought it was wise to point a weapon at me. At that moment, Taein appeared behind the Lizard Lord, engulfed in blazing flames. The monster was trapped, caught between two formidable opponents. Outside the dungeon gates, the anxious onlookers continued to watch. Suddenly, the swirling vortex of energy shifted, the color changing to a calming blue. A cheer erupted from the crowd. The gate was opening. Moments later, the guild team emerged from the portal, blinking against the sudden brightness of the outside world. Journalists surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust towards Taein. Guild Master! What happened in the dungeon? What about the boss? Guards swiftly surrounded him, shielding him from the press. Hisa stepped forward, her expression concerned. Guild Master, are you injured? I am fine, Taein assured her, waving off her concern. Behind him, his guild members murmured their thanks, the young woman who had greeted him earlier saying, If not for you, we would all be dead. Meanwhile, Juno, ever efficient, handed the collected mana stones to the burly warrior. My payment was up front, he stated, his tone dismissive. With one last, fleeting glance at the team, Juno simply departed. A journalist, persistent as ever, managed to push through the guards, approaching Taein. Guild Master! How did you clear the dungeon so quickly? What was your strategy? Taein turned, about to answer, expecting to see Juno behind him. But the young man was gone. He paused, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I wasn't alone, he said, his voice strangely hesitant. Alone? But we saw you! Teamwork, yes, blocking together, that's how you handled them all, right? The journalist pressed, eager for a soundbite. The warrior beside him chimed in, nodding enthusiastically. Our weapons broke. If not for the guild master, we'd have been destroyed a long time ago. Hearing this, Taein gestured towards the rookies. It was thanks to these people, their resilience. They lasted long enough. But the support, the persistent journalist exclaimed. The assistant. He was a weapon creator, wasn't he? Someone helped you, a support. Still confused, the warrior turned to the young woman. Was that you? Did you have that ability? She shook her head, equally bewildered. I'm not sure. Taein turned to the rest of the team, his brow furrowed. Didn't you see him create weapons? Right here, for all of you. They exchanged confused glances, then looked at the discarded backpack, where Juno's pickaxe should have been. He didn't even have one, someone commented. Another team member countered. He did have a pickaxe, but he must have lost it. He did collect all the mana stones, though. Taein's confusion deepened. He remembered vividly Juno conjuring weapons that had saved them all. Yet, it seemed they had all forgotten. He remembered Juno's words, forget about me, forget about my abilities. Was that the rental payment? But, how could someone erase memories? Especially about such a significant skill, a skill exclusive to A rank, or even higher creators. His friends, sensing his bewilderment, called his name, their voices laced with concern. Without a word, Taein tossed the weapon case into Hisa's waiting hands. I need to find someone, he said abruptly, and then he ran. Hisa and his vice leader exchanged bewildered glances as he sprinted off, weaving through the dispersing crowd. He kept running, his eyes scanning the street, searching for Juno, questioning if the young man had truly vanished into thin air. Suddenly he stopped. Juno. He was nearby, partially hidden behind a brick wall, watching him. Seeing that no one else was around, Taein realized he wouldn't catch him by chasing. Just then, his guild members caught up, their voices laced with concern. Guild Master! What's wrong? What happened? Taein turned to Hisa, his voice urgent. I need to find someone, he repeated, his mind already racing. A scene shifted, the image fading into the hustle and bustle of the city. Guild Master, Hisa has located Shinjuno. He entered a D-rank dungeon near South Pay around 1 p.m., with a group of 5 people. Taein, staring at a datapad filled with reports, looked up, a flicker of intense interest in his eyes. Excellent work, Hisa. Hisa hesitated, concern etched on her face. Guild Master, Why are you so interested in this, assistant? Taein glanced at the tablet, a thoughtful expression on his face. Do you really think he is just an assistant, Hiza? He paused, his voice laced with a dawning realization. He must be a D-rank creator, at minimum. Though, in all records, that is his listed rank. But the rental payment skill, that refutes everything. Rental payment is an A-rank skill. The rental payment ability, it's incredibly powerful. I've never seen anyone use it like that. And Juno, he used it to hide his true ability. A weapon creator like him could level up easily, but he's hiding. I need to find out why. He paused, a strange intensity in his voice. I will find out when I meet him again. A sensation he hadn't felt in years stirred within him, a flicker of genuine excitement. He recalled the feeling of the sword Juno had created in his hand. He could fight with his full strength, without the constant fear of the weapon shattering. He met countless swordsmiths, considered the best, always filled with fleeting hope when they presented their latest creations. But every time, the same crushing disappointment. Their confident promises crumbled the moment he unleashed a powerful fire strike. Weapons broke. Always. None had met his expectations. Not to mention the inherent limitations of creation skill, normal weapon types, confined by rank. But Juno had created something that surpassed all limitations, of type, of ability. With Juno's skill, anything was possible. Something he hadn't even dared to dream of, because he'd lacked the right weapon. The clock ticked, a stark reminder of time passing. Clearing a D-rank dungeon with 5 people, about 4 hours. Leaving just 1 hour remaining before Juno would likely emerge. Taein stopped pacing. He turned to Hizu. What's still on the schedule? A meeting with Guild Master Kenmo, sir. Cancel it, Taein instructed, his voice decisive. I am leaving early. I won't miss this opportunity. Meanwhile, deep within the D-rank dungeon, Juno's team battled a horde of orcs. The warrior, wielding a sword shimmering with faint blue energy, cleaved through an orc's stomach, watching as the monstrous creature collapsed. He stared at the blade, awe filling his voice. This is incredible. Made by an assistant? If this level of mana can shatter a boss's weapon, it's C rank, maybe even higher. He picked up the sword, hefting its weight, and laughed, a booming sound echoing through the cavern. Impressive! I've never seen a sword of such quality. He turned to Juno, a grin spreading across his face. You're not in any guild, right? Maybe we should recruit you for ours. The girl, the mage, nodded enthusiastically. Great idea! It's almost shameful for him to be just an assistant. Is that really true? She asked Juno, her eyes wide with curiosity. Juno laughed softly, a sound that held a hint of self-deprecation. Sharp eye, he replied, his gaze flicking towards the woman. Listening to their conversation, Juno realized something profound. He could channel far more mana than he had ever imagined. He glanced around at the exhausted faces of his team. Even in this D-rank dungeon, they had struggled. It wasn't a failed dungeon run, but it was far from easy. He walked towards a cluster of mana stones, their crystalline surfaces pulsing with energy, and dropped his backpack heavily on the ground. If he had possessed this much mana back then, in that dungeon, things would have been different. He felt an incredible surge of power, unlike anything he had experienced before. Not the raw, chaotic energy of the golem's mana, but something cleaner, more potent. Not merely the mana of a D-rank awakened, but something more. He felt a surge of relief, a deep sense of knowing. Weapon creation, no longer a problem. He created a pickaxe, the familiar tool materializing in his hand. Who would have thought memories could be so useful? He thought, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. The basic ability of a creator, the manifestation of items, their quality directly proportional to mana expenditure. Intuitive, yes, but limited. Until comprehension level. The higher the comprehension, the greater the efficiency, the superior the quality, even with the same mana input. He remembered the countless hours of training, studying materials, workshop lessons, the endless refining of his technique. It had yielded more than he had ever dared to hope. He began mining mana stones, the pickaxe striking the crystals with newfound resonance. He didn't know how much better it was, but the output felt significantly greater than the mana expended. Still, it wasn't enough. Creation and payment, simultaneously. Equipment that boosted mana was astronomically expensive, beyond his reach. At least right now. He opened the window displaying his passive mana absorption ability, his thoughts drifting towards the future, towards the potential that now, finally, felt within his grasp. The subtle hum of mana resonated within him, a reassuring thrum against the anxiety that had become a constant companion. Each cleared dungeon, each defeated monster was a small step, but progress felt agonizingly slow. He was chasing the elusive 20% mana absorption mark, a threshold that felt both impossibly distant and tantalizingly close. But the recent dungeons, even the protected ones, were yielding a paltry return, barely a percentage point for grueling hours of combat. Efficiency was a cruel joke. There was only one path left, a path he'd been dreading, a place whispered about in hushed tones amongst hunters, the Bug Dungeon. It was a mana nexus, a place where raw energy pulsed with terrifying intensity. The stories claimed it absorbed mana at a rate several times greater than any other dungeon, a risky proposition given his limited control and the unpredictability of rank errors within. He explained to himself, for the 100th time, that venturing into such a volatile place alone, especially without Taehan's steady presence, was bordering on reckless. He'd even toyed with the idea of a C-rank boss dungeon as a stepping stone, a safer arena to hone his abilities. After all, truly mastering his D-rank awakening hinged on a deeper understanding of mana absorption, a language he was only just beginning to decipher. With a final, concerted effort, the dungeon they were currently in yielded, and they emerged blinking into the daylight. A wave of relief washed over him as the team exchanged tired smiles and murmured thank yous, the ritualistic close of another hunt. He listened, a detached observer, as they praised each other's skills, not a single word spared for his contribution. A quiet satisfaction settled within him. His memory manipulation ability had worked perfectly, erasing any trace of his true actions from their minds. Junio? The sound, familiar and resonant, sliced through his contentment, freezing him mid-step. His breath hitched in his throat. He turned slowly, dread pooling in his stomach, and there he was. Yun Taehan, the leader of the Overkill Guild, unmistakable even in casual attire, was approaching, his secretary, Hizu, a composed shadow at his side. Taehan's gaze was direct, unwavering. "Do you remember me?" The question hung in the air, a lead weight dragging down his carefully constructed illusion. The realization crashed upon him. His ability hadn't worked on Taehan. A sigh escaped his lips, heavy with resignation. "Would you believe me if I said no?" he asked, the words barely a whisper. Taehan simply presented a business card, its pristine white surface stark against his tanned hand. "No, I wouldn't." He took the card, the smooth paper a strange tactile comfort in this unsettling moment. "Why are you here?" "I need a minute of your time," Taehan replied, his tone polite but firm. "There's something I need to discuss with you." His eyes flicked to the card. Overkill. One of the top guilds in Korea. His mind raced, calculating, rejecting. Joining such a behemoth, not yet. He needed more control, more power, before he could navigate those treacherous waters. Excuses, he needed excuses. "I don't have time," he said, turning away, feigning a brisk pace. But Taehan was not so easily deterred. A hand settled firmly on his shoulder, warm and insistent. "You won't regret this conversation. It will be quick, and dinner is on me." Hizu, ever observant, offered a dry remark. "Being a guild leader must free up a lot of time, if you can spend it on a D-rank support." He glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance, of something colder, rising within him. He didn't like her assessment, the dismissive tone. Still, a pragmatic thought surfaced. Dinner, at least, would save him money. He'd been meticulously tracking his expenses, calculating the precise cost of dungeon rentals. "Fine," he conceded, turning back to Taehan, but his voice was tight. "But quick." Taehan's smile widened, a flash of genuine warmth. "Agreed." Moments later, they were seated in a private room of a high-end restaurant. Dishes, fragrant and opulent, filled the table, a stark contrast to the dungeon dust that still clung to his clothes. He finally broke the silence, the question that had been gnawing at him demanding release. Why? Why would a guild leader like you waste time talking to a D-rank support? He couldn't fathom it being simply boredom, some idle whim. Taehan leaned forward, his gaze intense. From what I saw, Junio, you're a berserker. He paused, letting the word hang in the air, knowing its weight. An incredibly powerful one. And a berserker, he continued, his voice gaining a persuasive edge, needs a weapon. A weapon that can withstand that force. He leaned back, gesturing to the lavish spread. Finding such weapons, it's my constant pursuit. I've scoured the country, beyond even. Blacksmiths famed for their craft, reclusive weapon creators, if there's even a whisper of a possibility, I commission a piece. Time, money, none of it matters. He gestured with a frustrated hand. And yet, weapon after weapon, they fail. They shatter under my strength. All of them, except one. Taehan's eyes locked onto his, piercingly direct. The sword you created. The agonist. Understanding dawned, cold and sharp. He'd been careless. Too confident in his ability. He hadn't considered the possibility of a nullification skill, a berserker's innate resistance to manipulation. High-rank hunters, he reminded himself, required a different level of finesse, a subtler touch. Junio, Taehan said, his voice low and serious, pulling him from his internal reprimand. I'll be direct. Would you consider joining Overkill? Hisa's breath hitched beside Taehan, a surprised gasp. I know you're not affiliated with any guild. Taehan continued, ignoring her reaction. Join us, and you'll receive the best treatment. 10 billion won signing bonus, operational costs covered, profit dividends, a 1-year contract with a 10% raise each renewal. Yun Junio didn't let him finish the extravagant offer. He rose from the table, the silk of his borrowed chair whispering against his worn dungeon attire. I appreciate the offer, Guild Leader Yun, he said, offering a polite, shallow bow. But I have no plans to join a guild at this time. I must decline. He turned, a slight smile playing on his lips as he added, Thank you for the meal. Taehan's voice, laced with a touch of urgency, called out. Junio, wait! Hizu, finally finding her voice, interjected. Guild leader, why such a generous offer to a D-rank? She trailed off, clearly about to question the extravagance of the terms, but Taehan cut her off, his eyes still fixed on Junio's retreating back. If you'd felt what I felt, Taehan said, his voice hushed, almost reverent, you wouldn't be asking. He took a slow, deliberate breath. It's been a long time since I felt the cry of a weapon. With a weapon like that, it felt like I could do anything. And it endured. Hisa opened her mouth to speak, but Taehan took a long drink of water, silencing her before she could formulate her doubts. Of course, he added, with a return to his more businesslike tone. It's not just that feeling. He turned his gaze to Hizu, his question sharp and pointed. How many high-level weapons have we broken in the last year, Hisa? Her eyes widened, the enormity of the question dawning on her. The astronomical sums spent, the constant cycle of destruction, the desperate search for something, anything, that could withstand Taehan's power. If it were possible, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Then yes, such a contract, it would be insignificant. But she shook her head, a bleak finality in her tone. But it's impossible. No one is capable of creating such a weapon, not even the best. Taehan's gaze snapped back to her, conviction hardening his features. Junio can. I know it. He stood, his chair scraping against the polished floor. Therefore, no matter what Junio asks, we will recruit him. At any cost. Outside, walking down the brightly lit city streets, Junio replayed the encounter in his mind, a tremor of disbelief running through him. Overkill. Yun Taehan. Rejection. The sheer audacity of it all. It would have been beneficial. Incredibly so. But the timing was wrong. He needed to be patient. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that their paths would cross again. This was far from over. Meanwhile, In the echoing silence of a forgotten dungeon, goblin corpses lay scattered like discarded toys. A lone hunter, arm dangling uselessly at his side, gasped for breath, his eyes wide with terror, fixed on the figure who stood over him. Who are you?" the hunter choked out, his voice trembling. The man's response was a swift, brutal thrust of his sword, silencing the question forever. "Amusing," he murmured, pulling the bloody blade free. He surveyed the remaining survivor, a flicker of something like disdain in his eyes. "You know, in moments like these, they usually whine, beg for their lives. But you're different. You aspire to be a hero, don't you?" He smiled, a predatory curve of his lips. The boy, barely more than a youth, swallowed hard. Why are you doing this? Why kill us? For trophies?" The man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Trophies? Boring. And telling you, pointless, wouldn't you agree? To someone about to die?" He casually tossed his sword over his shoulder, the gesture nonchalant, yet menacing. Unless you defeat me. Then, perhaps, I'll reveal my motivations." He grinned again, a flash of sharp teeth. "Come on, hero. Don't keep me waiting if you don't want to die." Fear warred with a desperate flicker of defiance in the boy's eyes. He knew, instinctively, that distance was death against this opponent. With a guttural cry, he charged, throwing himself forward, reckless abandon masking his terror. The man's sword rose in a blur, intercepting the clumsy attack. "Is that all you've got, hero?" he taunted, deflecting the blow with effortless ease. Sparks flew as steel clashed against steel. The boy, fueled by adrenaline and fear, unleashed a flurry of desperate attacks, each parried, each met with the man's mocking laughter. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, the man disarmed him, sending the boy's sword spinning into the cavernous space. Before the boy could react, a brutal kick landed squarely in his chest, sending him sprawling across the hall, crashing against the cold stone wall. Pain exploded in his ribs, stealing his breath. "Sad," the man drawled, dragging his sword across the dungeon floor, the scrape echoing in the oppressive silence. "You volunteered, you know. For the first-rank domination of a hero." He shook his head in mock disappointment. "And you turned out to be such a small fish." "Still," he conceded, looming over the whimpering boy, his shadow engulfing him. "I suppose your courage, it's worthy of praise." Tears streamed down the boy's face as he begged. Please, forgive me, mercy." The man's smile widened, a cruel, bloodthirsty thing. "Mercy?" he echoed, raising his sword high. "Oh, I'll deal with you all right." The fatal blow fell, a gush of blood painting the dungeon floor crimson. He gazed down at the lifeless form, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. "Not even a warm-up," he sighed dramatically. "And that look of injustice, really, you shouldn't worry. I'll make sure they say you fought bravely against the boss. Died a hero." He pulled out his phone, snapping a picture of the corpse. "Standard procedure for a rank-era dungeon." He scrolled through the images, a collection of dead eyes and broken bodies. "Not bad," he murmured, a collector's appreciation in his voice. "The collection grows. My whole life, dedicated to collecting." A sudden shiver, unwelcome and intrusive, crawled down his spine. He turned sharply, disgust twisting his features. "Priestess!" he snarled, his voice laced with venom. "I hate that vile energy. Conceal it, or stop hiding it." The heavy hall doors swung open, revealing a woman in white robes, a priestess. She waved apologetically, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Apologies, Executor. I heard there were valuable components here, I rushed." He yanked his sword from the hunter's corpse. "Just idiots." She breezed past him, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Are you implying you wish to defy the Executor's will?" Her voice, though soft, held a chilling undertone. He sighed, irritation radiating off him in waves. "Sensitive," he muttered, then louder. "Just clean up this mess." "Of course," she purred, her smile returning, wider this time. "Clean up is my specialty." Her expression hardened, her voice dropping to a low, urgent tone. "And don't forget your promise. The priestess approached the corpse, her hands weaving arcane patterns in the air. You needn't worry, Executor. I'll contact you soon. A sickly green glow emanated from the hunter's wound. Who will it be this time? He asked, his voice devoid of curiosity, filled only with weary impatience. From the gaping wound, a clawed hand emerged, followed by a hulking, monstrous form. The priestess clapped her hands together, her eyes shining with macabre delight. A child! She exclaimed, her voice ringing with triumph. You were right, Executor! A magnificent child! A towering humanoid monster, its body radiating a malevolent energy, stood before them, a silent testament to her dark arts. Time bled into the next day. Association guards milled about the open dungeon gate, a cluster of curious onlookers adding to the usual morning bustle. Junio, arriving late, spotted a familiar figure in the crowd and his expression darkened with displeasure. Taehan, in a casual cap, adjusted the brim as Junio approached. You! Junio's voice was flat, devoid of warmth. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Then Taehan spoke, a hint of amusement in his tone. Good eyesight. To recognize me so quickly. His gaze dropped to the weapon case strapped to Junio's back. And that case? I only know one person who carries a weapon like that. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. What are you doing here? The guild member who was supposed to come fell ill. Taehan offered smoothly, a flimsy excuse. I was sent in their place. Junio's lips curled in disbelief. He was about to call him out when a voice hailed from the dungeon entrance. Hey! Time to go! Taehan moved, smoothly placing himself beside Junio, suggesting. Shall we enter? I knew we'd meet again. Junio said, his tone resigned. But not so soon. He mentally adjusted his plans, accepting the inevitable. And so, they passed through the shimmering gate, entering the familiar, damp chill of the dungeon. Why won't you join a guild? Taehan asked, his voice conversational as they walked. I already refused. Junio snapped, cutting off the conversation. I don't want to talk about it. One of the other team members piped up. Did you guys hear about the gate auction in Chuncheon this morning? Hyam Guild won, right? Another chimed in. Friend of mine was there, said they bid so high no one else even dared to compete. A flicker of interest sparked in Junio's eyes. He hadn't been paying attention to gate auctions. He wondered what they'd found. Interested in buying a gate? Taehan asked, his voice carefully casual. Join Overkill. You could acquire special gates, B rank and above, easily. Not just resources, but the guild name, it carries weight. He continued, his tone becoming subtly persuasive. Joining a guild means a lot for an awakened. People admire major guilds. A hunter gains employment, better income, rewards. Guilds offer benefits, influence. Special gates, access that requires not only skill but political connections. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Rare treasures, naturally monopolized by the major guilds. Taehan's gaze sharpened, focusing intently on Junio. You have goals, Junio. As an awakened. Whatever they are, overkill would make them easier to achieve. I don't understand why you keep refusing. Junio's reply was sharp, curt. It's none of your business. He understood Taehan's persistence. Overkill. Rejection must be a foreign concept to him. He needed to be blunt. I will not join any guild. Under any circumstances. Taehan stopped, surprised, his steps faltering. He considered Junio, his past, the Dawn Guild tragedy. Is it, because of the injury? From Dawn Guild's destruction? He ventured, recalling the reports. Or something else? He shook his head, a determined glint in his eyes. Whatever it is, I can't give up. They advanced deeper into the cavern, the mage illuminating the path ahead with glowing orbs. The air grew heavy, the silence punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of water. Suddenly, one of the men stumbled, a muffled exclamation escaping his lips. What is this? He touched his hair, fingers tangling in something sticky, thread-like. Is this a web? The mage raised her staff higher, bathing the area in an eerie light. The team leader, A young man barely out of his teens stepped forward, his voice tight. Monster territory. Spider legionnaires. He addressed the group, mostly rookies, their faces pale in the magical light. We all read the report. E rank individually, D rank in groups. About 50, reconnaissance said. Venom in their fangs. Don't get bitten. Taehan crouched, drawing his sword, the polished steel glinting in the dim light. He turned to Junio. They'll appear soon. Stay close. A sarcastic smile touched Junio's lips. Don't worry about your assistant. You should focus on the fight. Combat units protect supports, Taehan stated, his voice firm. Skill, situation, doesn't matter. Hunter rule. Junio scoffed, a cynical edge to his tone. No one follows rules like that anymore. His retort was cut short by a shout from one of the team members. They're coming! The sounds of skittering claws, rapidly approaching, echoed through the cavern. Everyone tensed, weapons raised, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The spider legionnaires descended, a horrifying cascade of chitin and fangs, clinging to the walls and ceiling. The swordsman, visibly trembling, muttered under his breath. Follow the plan, follow the plan. E rank individually, D rank in groups. The report had understated the sheer number. A horde, a writhing mass of spiders surged towards them. The hunters braced for battle. The swordsman, despite his fear, struck true, cleaving through the first spider. Another hunter, shield raised, channeled energy, repelling the monstrous creatures with a powerful burst. The mage launched bolts of sparks, piercing through chitinous armor. Taehan, observing the initial skirmish, conceded. They're holding their own. Rookies, but not bad. Then Junio sighed, a sound of weary surprise catching Taehan's attention. He turned. Seems like more than a few dozen. Junio murmured, his gaze fixed on the corridor. Just then, spiders rained down from the ceiling, ambushing the group. Taehan reacted instantly, activating his skill, his sword wreathed in flames, burning through multiple spiders in a wide arc. Their charred bodies tumbled to the ground. He pressed his assault, a grim satisfaction rising within him. Cries for help erupted from another direction. 3 team members, surrounded, were struggling, overwhelmed by the sheer number of spiders. More than expected, the team leader yelled, his voice strained. Reconnaissance. Who did recon? Hundreds, not 50. Mana's running low, the mage cried, panic tightening her voice. Junio, with me. Taehan shouted, sprinting towards the struggling team, adrenaline surging. But Junio moved in the opposite direction, a detached calm in his movements. Better for me to help the others. He called back, his voice carrying over the din of battle. You finish up here, then join us. Taehan froze, bewildered, watching Junio walk towards the swarm of monsters. A spider lunged, fangs bared. Junio, down! Taehan yelled, charging forward, fear spiking through him. He hadn't even seen Junio use energy on his sword, hadn't even known he had a sword until just now. He imagined the venomous bite, the paralyzing effect. But Junio stopped. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, his irises had shifted, swirling with an unnatural light, reflecting the intricate web forming on the cavern ceiling. The spider mid-leap, entering that reflected web, was abruptly impaled by a blade that materialized from thin air, a blade of pure, shimmering energy. Taehan stared, utterly stunned. The spider's corpse thudded at Junio's feet. Junio, unfazed, calmly surveyed the chaotic scene. He analyzed the situation, his mind racing. Sword, highest quality weapon possible right now. Multiple blades, mana reserves insufficient. Best option, this. With a slight flick of his fingers, he telekinetically pulled the energy blade from the spider's carcass, pointed it forward, a silent command. The sword levitated, spinning around him in a deadly dance, waiting. He focused on the encroaching monsters, pointed a finger. The sword hurtled forward. It pierced through spider after spider, a blur of motion, a whirlwind of death. With subtle flicks of his hand, Junio controlled its trajectory, sweeping through the cavern, a one-man army. Then, he lifted a finger towards the ceiling, pointing at the remaining spiders clinging to the rock. The sword shot upwards, a miniature tornado of steel and magic, ripping through the clinging creatures, tearing them from their perches. Silence descended, broken only by the dripping water and the rasping breaths of the remaining hunters. Taehyun stared, his mind reeling. Corpses, dozens of them, littered the cavern floor. His gaze snapped to the energy sword, now dissolving, fading back into nothingness. Less than 10 seconds, dozens of spiders. Materialization? A support? He'd never seen anything like it. Junio's voice cut through his stunned silence. He pointed towards the struggling team further down the corridor.